afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special Saturday edition of Chats with Champions. First, we want to thank our sponsors, The First, for making this program possible, and all the programs throughout the year that we're able to offer to our community. Today we host well-known Nobleboro Central School teacher Ken Williams and his former student Seth Campbell, who actually made good after school.
In spite of me, is that what you're
I guess
just checking. Word for word.
The two will explain the unofficial title of their presentation. Student finally hands in 1989 homework assignment to Nobleboro teacher at 14,000 feet in Denali National Park, Alaska, or as we've chosen to advertise it today as Linking Maine to Alaska, K-12 education outreach in Maine about climate change research on the highest point in North America. Join climate and glacier researcher Seth Campbell from Nobleboro and Ken Williams, his middle school science teacher, as they take you to the Kahiltna Glacier and beyond in Denali National Park. They were members of a multi-university expedition drilling a 250-meter surface to bedrock ice core at 14,000 feet on the Mount Hunter Ice Divide. Ken Williams has been a middle school teacher at Nobleboro Central School for 29 years, where he teaches science, reading, and writing. Ken's philosophy of teaching is one of high standards, hard work, humor, and relationships. I think that's going to be obvious during the presentation. He believes that there can't be education without the personal, and the fact that he joined former student and scientist Seth on an expedition to Denali National Park over 20 years since they parted classroom ways is proof positive that education is all about relationships. Seth Campbell developed an interest in the natural science through his father, not to mention a pesky science teacher, that seemed to give an endless supply of homework every night. He is now a PhD candidate at the University of Maine School of Earth and Climate Sciences, with a specialty in glaciology and cold regions geophysics applications. You get all the girls, don't you? Seth has been fortunate over the past 2 decades to work with and/or travel throughout the contiguous U.S., Alaska, Antarctica, Canada, Greenland, South America, New Zealand, and Australia. His research has been affiliated with UMaine, Department of Defense, National Park Service, Dartmouth College, University of New Hampshire, University of Washington, and Harvard University. Beyond his scientific endeavors, Seth has worked as a professional climbing guide, outdoor educator, EMT, and wilderness emergency medicine instructor. These technical skills have provided the necessary background to conduct scientific research in some of the most remote and challenging locations on the planet. Please join me in welcoming Ken and Seth.
I actually have not received a homework assignment yet from him, but I still owe him $25 for a lawn cut, probably 30 years ago. Anyway, so it's just a thrill of a lifetime for me to be here today with everybody, and that, you know, Pam said the turnout's really stunning for this situation, so that's really great. I think we have some ground rules that are really important. Crack a joke if you want to. There's going to be some fun pictures, I hope. Please interrupt us with questions, because I think that'll help us tune into what you guys need as far as part of the presentation. And just enjoy the show. And Pam, we agreed to turn the thermostat down about 30 degrees, right? So get everybody right in with the crazy thing. So, Seth, you want to add anything to that, or want to just go? Okay, great. So, we started when Seth met this group of sort of outreach people from this group called Polar Trek. Obviously, Polar Trek is teachers and researchers exploring and collaborating up at the upper left there. Polar means both South Pole and North Pole. So I've been nagging Seth for years. Oh, take me somewhere. Why don't you just take me somewhere? And he said, okay, we're going to put the money where the mouth is. And we wrote a grant together to get hooked up with this group called Polar Trek. And they were the funding source for Seth to take me on his expedition to Alaska and to Denali National Park. So through Polar Trek, with a grant, we got money to make this happen. They paid for substitute teachers, they paid for gear, They paid for all my transportation to and from Alaska twice, because I went up for some training, which you'll see in a minute. So Polar Trek was the group that funded this operation, and Seth is the person that actually pushed the process at the beginning, because I do think he wanted to get back at me at some point.
Could you check the focus? Is it in focus?
Yeah, it is.
Is that focused, Pam? Okay, that's what we got. Thanks. So we'll step in. Actually, it's easy to tell who's who there, I think, right? There's no confusion as far as that picture goes. So for me, it's really clear. It's relationships is at the top, because that's what it is for me. I mean, I agree with high standards. I want to push kids academically, but I think it's all about, in small town where we live, it's all about what you build between people and among people. So for me, that's why relationship is at the top. Adventure, you'll see a true adventure in a little while. It's about the science, and it's about place. And we live in a really neat place, but the Denali National Park is a stunning part of the planet, and I witnessed it firsthand under Seth's guidance. So moving on into that. So find the right person there. It's actually pretty funny. So that's not Seth in 5th grade right there. Actually, it is. That's me with hair and non-gray beard. That's Seth on a backpacking trip. I believe that was your first?
My
first backpacking trip. So I still take 8th graders at Nobleboro on backpacking trips, and for Seth, that was his very first. I mean, lots of outdoor experiences with his folks growing up, lots of fishing, hunting, trapping, all the stuff associated with that, but never a real wilderness backpack trip. So that's sort of where we really, I think, probably started the pretty permanence of this relationship that we've had over the last nearly 30 years. So that's some neat shots of us as younger days. This is teachers' hard work in Fairbanks, Alaska. I want you to pay close attention to that picture. Part of my training was a week in Fairbanks last February, where I went up with all the other teachers from the Polar Trek group who get assigned researchers. So when you apply to Polar Trek, you get assigned a researcher, and you get teamed with that researcher. Most teacher-researcher couples don't know each other. Seth and I had the relationship ahead of time, which I think they were intrigued about a little bit as far as making it go with things. But just great people from all over the country here. We're going to Antarctica and Alaska. She's from Chicago. He actually was a science teacher at Carabasset Ski Academy. From Maine. I had been in Finland for a little while. So just people I met in Fairbanks on my training. We had some outreach things in Fairbanks. We got to play with hibernating ground squirrels, because one of the research projects was hibernating ground squirrels. I'm going to let Seth pick up on this one a little bit, because this is associated with your work at Krill, right?
Yeah, so I also, besides my PhD work, I work for the Cold Regions Research and Engineering Lab in Hanover, New Hampshire, and it's part of the Army Corps of Engineers. And our goal is to basically do research on cold regions environments. So that includes glacier research, permafrost research. There's a big push nowadays, concern about permafrost melting and thawing, and the release of carbon, methane in the atmosphere in Alaska and the Arctic. So this is actually a facility that was established by CREL, that's short for Cold Regions Lab, back in the 50s, 60s, and they're actually expanding it right now. And it's actually a tunnel. If you bounce to the next slide, it's a tunnel that tunnels into permafrost, so you actually get to see firsthand what permafrost looks like, and they've been using it for field studies for several decades at this point.
And that's a mastodon or mammoth bone. I can't remember actually which one. They sort of lived at the same place at the same time, but I'm not exactly sure. But that was just, you were in the tunnel, and that was actually the teacher from Carabasset Valley, Maine, holding a mastodon or mammoth bone. So after my week in Fairbanks, Seth came back and did an outreach at school. He's having kids behave like a glacier there. I'm not quite sure how he did that, but they were being glaciers at the moment. Nice to get middle school kids moving, but Seth came back to outreach. Now we're going to head into the Alaska part of the deal. So this is just a slide of sort of how things move. So we start into Anchorage, into Talkeetna, and then Talkeetna to Mount Hunter, or the Mount Hunter Ice Divide, where Seth will spend a lot of his time with his talk, but up into the Denali National Park. So in Anchorage, logistics, gear movement, U-Haul trucks, ship things from the East Coast. This is the team, minus one or two, who were reloading and loading gear that got shipped into U-Hauls for us then to transport to Talkeetna. So this is just a little bit of a close-up. Talkeetna down here, and then Seth, is that the Kahiltna? So this is the Kahiltna Glacier. That's Seth's study site, and Mount McKinley is probably, am I close, Seth?
Go up to the right,
Up to the right.
right there.
Okay, so gives you lay of the land as far as our travel into Mount McKinley. So in Talkeetna, gear, logistics, repacking, packing organization, all sorts of stuff. This is one of the team members who's a PhD student at Washington, named Brad Markle. He's actually putting a climbing skin on mountaineering skis, because that's how we moved up the glacier, on mountaineering skis with these climbing skins on them for traction.
What time of year was this?
May to June.
Yep. That's messing around with some gear in in the Talkeetna Roadhouse. That's one of the University of Maine professor, Carl Kreutz. Yeah. So hard at work in the back of a U-Haul. There was just so much stuff. I mean, you guys did a pound calculation, Seth. I believe it was 12,000 pounds worth of gear that got moved in and out of Denali National Park. This is Seth and part of the team waiting for GPS units to boot up to make sure they're working properly with the notice the solar chargers. These are called clean mountain cans. So going into the wilderness area in Denali National Park, you worry about waste and human waste especially. So these were our toilets for for you, 2 months. For me, close to 3 weeks. And it's really interesting how they manage that. And there's a lot of science and a lot of sort of discussion about how best to do that. But that's where you poop. And it's lined with a plastic bag, and those plastic bags have to be managed up on the glacier. And in some places you have to bring them out because they don't want them left on the glacier, but in other places you're allowed to actually throw them into crevasses. So the one time I remember, it was like, all right, people rope up, grab the bag and find a crevasse, and that's what happens. Now they're actually managing sort of the downflow of the glacier around pollution that could eventually come out the end of the glacier and into groundwater that actually supplies some people with their water supply, as far as I understand. So in Talkeetna we had a briefing. Seth, the orange jacket guy?
John Leonard, he's the lead climbing ranger for Denali National Park, so he's in charge of all the climbing rangers in the park that are there for safety purposes, to manage the park resources. So he's the person that we basically deal with to manage our logistical nightmare, as I put it, getting all our gear in the park.
Very sensitive to helicopter travel, since it's a wilderness area, and noise pollution for people using that part of the park. So he runs, what's his last name?
Roderick. Paul Roderick.
Yeah, Paul. So he runs the Talkeetna Air Taxi, which is the fly-in, fly-out service for people who need to go to the climbing base camp on the Kahiltna Glacier. And he does other operations as well, but you've known him for years. And he's just has over the years become very excited about Seth's work in Denali National Park. And we just met him at dinner one night and just chatted up. So.
And I can add something to that. The cool thing about Talkeetna, if anyone's been there, I know there's some people that have been there that I was actually there for my first trip. The cool thing about Talkeetna is it's a small town. It's kind of like the town that we live in. We've had ice cores stored in freezers of businesses. They've been moving the fish out of the way to stuff our ice cores in. They really bend over backwards. And Paul, out of his own pocket, pitched money. We've spent a lot of years up there, and when we weren't funded, we're still trying to get this project going. He spent money out of his own pocket to fly us in the mountains. So, really a dedicated group of people in Talkeetna.
So additional pounds and tons of food repacked and packed into these action packers, weighed for everything had to be weighed because it has to be properly placed on the aircraft moving from Talkeetna to the base camp. Satellite phone communication needed to be set up and managed and just properly just integrated into the whole operation, so everybody was clear on communication. Not one of the planes we flew, thankfully, so, but that was right by where we were all working as sort of a fun reminder that, this is not, it's not walking to the village store if you're in the middle of town. It's definitely, there's some risk associated with it. One of their pilots just hit a rut on a river or a lake and wiped this plane out, and thankfully everybody was okay. But it was right there as a reminder of what you're up against. This is the Talkeetna Airport, where there is no TSA presence. In fact, you had to actually step over the fuel lines and stuff down from the tanks to the aircraft. It was just really very interesting. But pilots load their own planes. They know how to manage the weight. You help move gear into the plane, but you don't actually help the pilot do any part of the packing of the aircraft, which I thought was pretty fascinating. They have their smartphones out calculating weight and location and everything, and I have been working on that. That was runway presence there. All that packaging is all the drilling equipment used by the driller up on the mountain on the right side that Seth will get to. So I'm about ready to leave, and I'll just, for clarification purposes here too, I did not go to the drill site with Seth and the drill team. I was part of the logistics, the preliminary, all the preparation work, and then I moved up the glacier with the whole team to acclimatize, because they can't just go from here, or where they live, to 14,000 feet where they were doing their work. You had to gradually move up to at least 11,000 or 12,000 feet, right, in order to then be healthy at 14,000 feet. So I was there for that part of the work, that 2-week climb up the glacier. And that's me, runway, about ready to go. That's me in the plane. I don't know if I think I was probably a little bit nervous at that point. So, and I'm going to let you take over that one, Seth, just because it...
Yep. So this is a Google Earth image of Denali, and you fly into Denali National Park, and you have this little red strip here in the bottom right-hand corner that's called Kahiltna International Airport. And it literally is an international airport. There's nationalities from all over the world traveling to this place. And this climbing route was first climbed in the 1950s, and it was pioneered by Brad Washburn, who some of you might know. He actually mapped the topography of the presidential range. He's famous for mapping the topography of the Denali National Park area, as well as the Himalaya around Mount Everest. So this route was first put up by Brad Washburn, and now it's the classic climbing mountaineering route for climbers to travel to try one of the 7 summits. Denali is the highest summit in North America, so it's one of those summits that people want to travel to. So we start here, and then we travel up glacier via a rope ski team, mountaineering team. And the original site that we originally thought we were going to drill was right here at about 10,000 feet. And we made it to about here for camping at 11,000 feet with Ken and our team. And then we acclimatized further by doing an acclimatization climb up to 14,000. Ken and I made it to about here, a little satellite peak, about 13,400 feet, which you'll see a video of shortly.
And your drill site is just off map here, right?
Yeah, the drill site's kind of over here. And so once we acclimatized, we came back down and we flew via helicopter to the drill site, which is on the plateau. It's actually at about 13,500 feet where the drill site is.
Now, how long a walk was that you just took us over?
We spent about 9 or 10 days to acclimatize, to let our bodies acclimatize over that time. So you generally gain 1,000 to 2,000 feet a day, and you may take a rest day or 2 rest days to make sure your body's feeling good. This, in all honesty, was probably the best field season I've ever had out of 15 or 16 field seasons doing this type of work, because everything worked very well, and we paid attention to our bodies. And we made a conscious decision. Unfortunately, Ken didn't get a chance to experience any science, because we made a conscious decision during the acclimatization climb to not do any science, to just focus on making sure we were all feeling healthy, so we could focus on the actual pouring effort later on.
How about in terms of
mileage, Seth? So from
Mileage is
here
about 30.
to
Well, it's about 25 kilometers, I think.
okay, and then what's the elevation of the airport?
Elevation gain at the elevation at the airport's about 7,000 feet, so you gain about 7,000 feet in elevation to get to 14,000.
What's the height of the mountain?
The height of the mountain's 20,320 feet.
What was the weather like?
You have winds, well, temperatures range from 20 below to 30. You walk around in a t-shirt during the day because there's so much reflection off the snow, and no gloves.
yeah, you'll see some of that. Our coldest night, you guys said, was probably about 25 below.
Yeah, we had 25 below, 25, 30 below for a couple of nights. And winds ranging from flat calm to, or we had a windstorm, and my advisor and I got to the drill site. We were stuck there for about 5 days, and we had winds of 60 miles an hour probably.
I was home and warm it up. So just shots flying into the base camp, additional shots into the base camp. That's actually the Kahiltna International Airport. That's the airstrip. That's actually a plane. And these are a group of tents from all the climbing teams, because this is where people start to climb. You know, we were the only science team there. Everybody else was there. It's the 100th anniversary year of the first summit of Mount McKinley. So there's a big international presence there. So you fly, and that's actually the trail, that red line marked on last slide or two. So that's what base camp looks like when you land, and it's just, oh my gosh, it was just, when you land there, it's just going into a different planet. It was just, thrilling to fly in there, but then once you land and you step out, it's just kind of weird. And the scale is just phenomenal. So before we actually started to move up the glacier, we had a couple days there for just planning preparation. This was crevasse rescue training. That's actually Seth probing the edge of this crevasse just to make sure it's safe enough for us to sort of set up a system to then get me in a crevasse, because I had to prove to him that I could get myself out if need be. And I think I passed that with maybe a C-. So that was our cook tent. This was preparing to move up the glacier, getting everything ready, traveled by backpacks, pulling sleds. I think Seth's backpack was probably 50 pounds, his sled was probably 60 pounds, my backpack was maybe 20, and my sled was maybe 15, and I thank him for that. That's what moving up the glacier actually looks like, which is just, and this, the scale of that, Seth, you said, you were looking at that last night.
It's over a mile high.
It's over a mile high, so, and it doesn't even look real when you're standing there, which is sort of what one of my big takeaways is. So this is a short little video that's how we blaze up the glacier. So just don't blink, because you'll actually see the pace. Watch. It's fast. That's how fast it is.
Last year I had a student with me and we were doing some work on the glacier. We were moving so slow that he was actually able to read a book.
And I got back from this, and Ben took 8th graders into the White Mountains on a backpacking trip, and this was so much easier than walking around the White Mountains, because there were no roots, there were no rocks, there were no, there was nothing to worry about, except unless you were leading, you just had to keep the rope in between your skis and just move along. It was interesting. Campsite, digging in, setting up tents, making chairs. You'll see like a little kitchen set up there, cook stove, melting snow. That's Dom and Tim just sort of hanging out. And you'll see, sun's out. It was probably maybe 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. No real need for any real warm gear. That was one of the, I wasn't nervous at any real point in time, but that was one where Seth yelled back at me. He said, ski over that pretty quickly. Because if you look down into that was a pretty wide open crevasse that would just ski right over that small little opening, which is why I appreciated the rope to Seth. That's just a picture moving up glacier with me with above the clouds. That's all cloud layer behind me. Just phenomenal place to be on the planet. This is the camp at 11,000 feet. And these are caches of climbers who have gone beyond this campsite, and they've left fuel and food behind, marked with skis and sleds. At this point, we were no longer traveling by skis. We didn't camp any higher, but we went up here, crampons and rope teams. That crevasse is, 5 or 6 school bus size. This elevation change is about 1,000 feet to put it to scale. It's really difficult to put it to scale. Anything you want to mention about that, Seth, other than?
Maybe bounce back to the last one.
Yeah.
I think it's worth noting that the other thing that we really need to pay attention to with this whole trip, all these projects that we do, is safety. And as an example, Ken, if you want to point out with the pointer where that crevasse is, there's 4 Japanese climbers that are buried there still from an avalanche. And so you're dealing with avalanche terrain, you're dealing with poor weather conditions, you're dealing with all kinds of issues that can kill you. It's not the safest place to be. So that is first and foremost for all these projects that we do in these types of places, is dealing with safety issues.
And that was just super evident with the team that Seth had. I mean, it was everybody chipped in. There was, no drama because there couldn't be. It was just super clear communication. Everybody looking out for everybody. It was phenomenal, phenomenal to be part of that team. So, I don't know if you want to point out anything there.
Your point that we made it to,
which is right there. So that's the highest point we got. or I got, Seth has been higher, right? You've been higher on it? Yeah, you've been higher than that, but that's the farthest point I got from that camp. So we didn't camp any higher than this camp at 11,000 feet, but we did go higher to that little spot. This was ice axe training up that slope. And then here we were on crampons, just moving up to acclimatize even more, just views out into the, Alaska and beyond. This was actually steep, steeper than the photograph sort of lets you believe. And I would not have wanted to fall there. But, roped in with Seth and another guy. This was a lunch break for the two of us. Moving up Glacier, just, incredible.
And what was the scariest moment, and what was the physically most difficult moment of the trip?
So for me, I don't think I was ever really scared, but Seth had me lead part of our 3-person team when we were moving from like the 9,000-foot camp to the 11,000-foot camp, and it started to snow, and the wind was blowing, and you're in the clouds. So white ground, white clouds, white snow. I'm leading, which means and I was literally looking left to right to try and find the ski pole holes from the person who had been there before me, because I looked up, you couldn't see anything. So I actually was not having much fun at that particular moment. And when we finally got to camp, that was one of those big hug, way to go, this is where I needed you to be, and if we don't get any higher than this, we're good. So that was pretty cool. Yep.
Did you meet any motorcyclists up there?
Motorcycle, no, but we took a rest day, and all the skiers skied.
One of those places you had, they were motorcycle hill.
Yep.
So.
No. But there were some ski bums up there. Seth and some of his buddies on our rest day just skied up and down, ski down, put the skins back on the skis, come back up, ski down, and they had some good fun skiing. So that's just one of my personal favorite shots of Seth's. All right, so I'll let you speak to that one, and then I only got about half a dozen more slides.
Yeah. So that's the high point that Ken and I reached, and that's actually looking towards the ice divide. Ken can point, that's Mount Hunter in the background, and we drilled the core right where Ken's pointing basically. It's kind of behind the peak actually, but.
So base camp is sort of like down in there.
Yep.
So we did this, 25-kilometer big horseshoe up to that point, and then this is like a minute and a half video that's just. And it was just the two of us up there.
You have another question back here.
Sorry. Yeah.
So were you on the route that some climbers were taking?
Oh, yeah.
That's the majority of the climbers take that route.
And so were you in among them?
Yep.
Oh, and there's actually a good shot of some climbers that we've met on the way down. Small world story too, so if we get to it.
Yep. All right. So this is Seth and Ken here on top of a little peak, 13,400 feet, looking right at Mount Hunter. And then we're going to sweep around, and as we move to our left, you'll just see more little ridges, and eventually, as we continue sweeping left, you'll see Denali coming up into view, which, believe it or not, is about 7,000 feet higher than where we're standing, and you just can't imagine the scale. It just looks like somebody dropped a postcard down in front of you, and it could be 500 feet or 1,000 feet, but reality is it's over a mile higher than us, and it's just really unbelievable.
And I'm going to continue panning, and this is actually going back. This, looking right where I'm at right now, is the top of the Kahiltna Glacier at about 13,100 feet above sea level. And I'll start panning around to the west. With this rock buttress, you can see the clouds well below us. That's Peter's Dome down in the clouds there. Peter's Glacier is underneath the clouds. I'll keep spinning around here. An unnamed peak. In the background you can see Kahiltna Dome. And then I'll pan into, that's Mount Crossan, and in the very background, the highest mountain there is Mount Forker at over 17,000 feet. And then to the left of Forker, in the clouds unfortunately, but underneath those clouds, the Kahiltna Glacier continues about 70 kilometers away from us to the south. And here we are back to Mount Hunter.
So I got a little nervous there because we were on a cornice, And he was like, yeah, don't worry about it. I'm like, can I just worry about it for a minute? He said, nah, don't worry about it. So I got a little nervous there. That's at Camp 11,000 feet. The crevasse that Seth talked about, those Japanese climbers, is sort of right over there. And when we were coming down, this was literally a waterfall of clouds just coming over the ridge on that, and it was just, stunning, stunning. The driller who's been all over the planet, actually that's Mike the driller. He didn't go up with us to that little summit. He just sort of hung back and took a nap. He's been all over the planet, drilling in Antarctica, all over Finland, Canada. He just said he's never seen anything like that before. So that was a pretty crazy moment. That was after that day, just Camp Lake, I was Camp 11,000 feet. Little, just hanging out in our little tent cove with the big wall behind us, other climbing groups behind. This was a group that had summited Mount McKinley a couple days ahead of time, and there's a small world story here that I'll let Seth share with everybody.
Yeah, so the gentleman on the right-hand side with the white baseball cap, he's mountain rescue in Alaska, and it turns out he's good friends with Jake Russell. Dean Russell is Jake's from here. Jake's a buddy of mine that I went to high school with and played sports with the whole time. And Jake was stationed in Alaska for a while. And we just got talking, and it turns out he was from a small, the same unit in Alaska.
So, and that's his backpack, which just okay. I'm glad Seth's carrying my stuff. That's pretty cool. So I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom because sometimes I just wanted to get out of the tent, and my sleeping bag was so warm that even if it was 25 below and I went out to pee, I just got back in and was fine. But that was a sunset at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, and I just didn't feel like using my pee bottle because sometimes you're worried about them filling up while you're in the tent. That would be a bad thing. So now, fast forward 10-mile ski back to base camp. That's an aerosol sampler that was set up at base camp by a University of New Hampshire professor. Solar powers in the back. This was our sort of gear tent with communication and batteries and satellite phones. And where if it was windy or snowy, where you blogged, because I was responsible for a blog on the Polar Trek website that you can refer to. That's the outside view of that. Then we had to start to manage gear movement up to Seth's drill site, which is a little bit of that. That's helicopter training. That's a helicopter fuel bladder. This is a lot of the gear that Seth and his other team had to move up to their drill site. This is Seth and one of the crew members on a helicopter crew doing ground-to-air communication, moving gear for sling loads because that's how gear got moved from base camp up to the drill site. One of the helicopter pilots who talked about not worrying about if we crash because we'll be okay. So this is literally, that's Seth right there. I'm saying goodbye to Seth. He's going up to the drill site via helicopter. I had another day or so at base camp before I came home. And then I'm going to just turn it right over to Seth because I think, well, I may have one more slide. I don't know more about it.
We'll just bump this fast.
Yeah.
So this is a video at the drill site. Helicopter sling loads all the gear up to us. We got about 17 helicopter sling loads. At the elevation we're at, the helicopter can sling load about 700 pounds of gear. I'm going to bounce it forward because it's kind of a long video, but so all these are ice core boxes. We actually store meter-long sections of ice core inside each one of these boxes. We'll put about 17 meters of ice core per box. And what I'm doing, that's me, I'm actually putting on slings that they already dropped gear off, giving them the slings back so they can load more gear down at base camp.
So this is my last slide or two. That's me actually heading home. One last shot out of the end. I got to ride shotgun with the pilot, which was just, until the low fuel light went on when he picked up somebody else at a glacier, I was okay with everything. But he didn't seem to worry about it. And one of my, I have a bunch of takeaways, but my big takeaway is pretty much this quote that Seth supplied. It's just, it was 9 people working together to make this happen. And for then Seth to move into the drill aspect and the science aspect, it's even more. There were just dozens and dozens of people and a lot of money through people's hard work and grant writing to just make this all happen. And it doesn't happen without people working together. Absolutely.
How many people were on the mountain in total when you were there, on the mountains?
About over 1,000 people try to climb Denali every year. And that climbing window ranges from late April till the beginning of July. So at any period of time, you can have a couple hundred people on the mountain. And most of them climb via that one route. So generally, wherever you stay, wherever camp you're at, there's people there for the most part. So you're running into a whole host of random people.
At that camp, 11,000, Bob, there might have been 40 people, maybe 35 or 40 people there when we were there. All different Koreans, Italians, Germans.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's striking for an innocent is the cleanliness and lack of trash. If one follows in the National Geographic the chaos in the Himalayas
Oh, yeah.
around
Yeah.
that Everest, and this is really, it must have taken a lot of work over a lot of years to manage it this way.
Yeah, and you know, one of the best questions that we had on the blog that Ken and I had going was about the decision making in terms of how do we minimize our impact on the environment, how do we minimize any pollution. And one of the questions is, okay, well, we actually paid trucks to come up and park out in Talkeetna. They're freezer trucks, 2 of them, and drive from Talkeetna with the cores all the way back to Colorado, and then they're shipped from Colorado back to the States. Well, that's a huge waste. It's a lot of fuel. But when you think about it, there are thousands. This is a host of some people involved. Tons of volunteer time. These are all organizations. Over the past 7 years, we've got 22 grants to get this project funded. National Science Foundation gave us $1 million to run this program. So if we relied on airlines, to get our ice core, and those ice cores sat on a tarmac where we didn't have control over that, there's $1 million and all that time wasted. So it was a very conscious decision for us to decide to transport them back with 2 trucks. We actually personally talked with the truck drivers, and we had cell phones of the truck drivers. It was both of them were husband and wife team, and they were super fired up about this project. So we knew the cores were actually going to get from point A to point Z. So it just it goes back to that whole collaboration, that last quote that we showed. It's a huge collaborative effort for people to pitch in. And now we're trying to get this information out. That's why we're here. And I'm psyched about this as well as Ken, because some of my friends that I've had since we were this high get to see why I'm gone for 6 months a year. I've spent, I think, 9 months of my life on this mountain doing this type of work. It's taken me 9 months to get this funding. It's been about a 10-year process overall for this project to get to fly, and now I have other projects that we're trying to plan as well outside of the States. So I'm going to jump into more of the science. We have about 20-some-odd minutes, I think.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. So again, feel free to ask questions as we go. I may make it through everything, I may not, but I'll jump into a little of the science behind what we've been doing, why we focus on this, and this is a good slide to show, just as a start of the world. Basically, the areas that are red and orange are areas that are losing a significant amount of ice mass right now. All right, so the areas you see are down in Antarctica, on the coast of Greenland, and then Alaska. And this little description gives you an idea of how much sea level rise could occur. If all the ice melted in Alaska, you could have 3 feet of sea level rise. Greenland, 20 feet. Antarctica, over 190 feet of sea level rise. Now, so Greenland and Antarctica are obviously the big contributors, but when you look at all the mountain glaciers, this chart shows all the different mountain glacier systems in these bar graphs. So everything that's going up, these glaciers are actually gaining a little bit of mass, or they claim they're gaining mass. In reality, it's probably that we don't have a lot of research at these places. All the areas that are pointing down are losing mass. And if you notice about Alaska, Alaska is by far the biggest contributor to sea level rise of all mountain glacier systems in the world. So how does that affect us? Well, Maine is actually pretty robust in the grand scheme of things, but you think about all the islands, all the French Polynesian islands, where it's a foot or 2 above sea level. Millions and millions of people are going to be affected. Well, where do those people go? It's going to affect us in some form or fashion. This is just a map that was put together several years ago of what would happen if we had a 1 meter sea level rise in Portland, or 6-meter sea level rise, basically you kind of wipe out downtown Portland. Now I'm going to show a video here, and this video was put together by a student that actually just graduated at the University of Maine, Lauren Wheeler. She's starting her PhD in New Mexico, and she's a colleague of mine that I've been working with for a few years on some of these models. And what it'll show is it'll show the change in glacier states in Alaska over the past 100,000 years. And the biggest take-home point is just watch how it fluxes back and forth. And in over a 100,000 year time period, you'll see one huge event, and then you see it disappear very rapidly. And this is the coast of Alaska, obviously. So there's a huge one, and then it's gone. Very quick. So this is the type of stuff we're researching. We're trying to figure out how fast this stuff happens. How fast do we see these glaciated states come and go, wax and wane? And I'm not even getting into the whole climate change conversation. The interesting thing about Alaska is a lot of the glaciers, the ice temperature sits right at about 0 degrees, 0 degrees. So right at freezing point. Whereas Antarctica, the average temperature may be 20 below, 30 below. So a little tiny change in temperature in Antarctica doesn't necessarily make a big change, a dent in terms of the melting. Whereas Alaska, because the ice sits right at that 0 degree temperature, a little change in temperature can really drastically impact the state of the glaciers. This is a picture of one of the most beautiful places I've ever been on the Juneau Icefield in Alaska. This is the Gilkey Trench, and you actually, if you look, there's some really cool features in the glacier. But what I want you to notice here is you see this light area in the bedrock, and then it's darker. This is the trim line between the two. The trim line is basically a distinguishing feature where the glacier used to be at that elevation. And that elevation changed at about 1,000 feet. That was only 20 some odd years ago. So our goal for this project has been 4 things primarily. 1, come up with a 1,000-year plus or minus record of precipitation and climate in central Alaska. It's an area that we know very little about, actually. The second thing is figure out how the weather patterns have changed and where the pollution comes from. We have a set of cores that were collected on the coastal Alaskan range. They show a significant amount of pollution from Eurasia coming across. We see these records. And we've used those, well, other people have used those to say, hey, we need to actually monitor what's going on outside of the United States, because that pollution is being transported to our land, and what we're dealing with. Monitoring the changes in the Alaska range, and then obviously also putting it into predictive models for what's going to happen in the future. So you've already seen a map kind of like this. This is the Kahiltna Glacier. Ken and I made it to here, and we actually hiked up, and this is a little satellite peak that we stood on that we just showed the video at. And I'll show these velocities here. These are actually ice flow velocities of how fast the ice is moving. Now, as you have warm up of the atmospheric temperature, you have melting. That melt reaches down towards the bed. As that water reaches the bed, you change the friction of the bed relative to the ice. It slides faster. Over the past few years, velocities here, the past say 15 years, velocities have increased by about 50%.
So what is the real, I don't know how to interpret those numbers.
Yeah, so these numbers are meters of flow per year. So the ice is moving almost 250 meters per year from this location to another location in the direction of that
almost
arrow.
a meter a day.
Yeah, yep. Whereas 15 years ago, the best measurements that we had 15 years ago at this location suggested it was moving half of that. Jumping into these changes, we're trying to come up with ideas of how glaciers have changed in the past. And what my job has been focused on, someone asked, what is geophysics? Basically, the cryogeophysics was mentioned earlier. I use ice-penetrating radar to look at the internal stratigraphy, internal layering of glaciers, and look at the depth of glaciers. And this is a system, it's just like a cell phone. So if everyone here probably has a cell phone, or most people do, it has a transmitter and a receiver. Sends a signal out. That signal actually gets sent down through the ice. And that signal bounces off of different layers in the ice. It also bounces off the bedrock and it gets reflected back. And the receiver records that time period it takes for that radio wave to travel down to the bed and back. I know how fast a radio wave travels in the ice, so I can then calculate how deep the ice is. And I can also see different layers in the ice. So, as an example, this is an example of a radargram. And this guy here is the unit. This is what we use. This is a transmitter and receiver. It's got a little computer, and we basically walk along the glacier. I've actually taught my mother how to use this. So basically this is an example of what we collect for data. And on this scale, I'm just going to look at this one little figure. We have depth here, distance here. This interface is bedrock. Everything above, all this is ice. And you see a nice bedrock reflection. We can see different features like all these lines here tell us that there's actually a lot of melt going on in the glacier. Whereas up glacier here, this is higher in elevation. We see nice layering inside the glacier. No melt is actually occurring. And I'm not going to get into the details of why we know this, but we can tell a lot of thermal properties about the glacier as well. So we mapped out one site we thought we were going to drill. This area here, again, Ken and I made it. We camped about right here. We climbed up this hill to about over here. We thought we would drill here, but we found all kinds of wacky complexities at this site. And I'm going to show a video here. I have a flubber table. A lot of you have walked by this and patted it and wondered what it is, but it's actually a material that flows and behaves very similar to how ice flows.
You could turn up one of the lights there if you want.
Where are the roots? Right here. Yeah, that's right. So,
Push
I
it up.
actually made, I bought it from, I bought super glue, or glue from Robbie Hunt's store over here. And so this is what I got to make from your stuff. So if you pull on it nice and slow, it actually behaves and stretches out like glaciers do. But if I pull it really fast, it fractures. Ice does the same thing. We actually use this in a laboratory experiment to model how ice flows. And I'll show you a video example that's actually doing exactly what's going on here. So this is a time-lapse video of ice flowing around a bend. And that bend is supposed to simulate that location that we originally thought about drilling. If you look at it, the lines, they separate faster at some locations and they don't separate as fast at other locations. There's a lot of complexities there that we were trying to deal with. We couldn't figure out the details. We decided it was not a good place to drill. So we went to the second site that we'd seen in 2009, I think. It took the Park Service a few years to agree to fly us up there. Once they did, we did a bunch of, I spent about a month on this divide. This is Denali, this is Mount Hunter, Mount Forker's over here. Ken and I made it to just around the corner here on Denali. And this line here represents ice flowing to the left here and to the right here. So it's an ice divide, so ice is separating apart. All the data we collected, this just kind of show this map. The color scheme here shows depth. So the maximum depth is where the black is. It reaches about 250 meters depth. And then it shallows up on the sides to maybe 100 meters depth. So 300 feet to 750 feet. And I'm going to show little models that we made of this site. We used radar to map out the bed topography. We used GPS information to map out the surface topography. And we know a lot about how ice flows. And this is an example of a model that shows its particle tracing. So if we follow one of these lines, it shows where ice would technically flow from that location over a given time period. So what we use this for is to actually locate the best location to drill an ice core from. We want to drill an ice core where there's very little flow, where the smallest amount of flow. And that's basically right in these areas where there's actually no lines being drawn. The ice is just stagnant, it's sitting there. This is another example of a flubber model that kind of shows the same thing. We would drill right in here, where the ice is just stretching out. So we have to, when we look at climate records, we have to account for that stretching out of layers. But it's a lot easier to account for stretching out of layers than it is to account for ice flowing around a bend and doing all kinds of other funky things. So this is the drill site. Once we flew all our gear up to the drill site, we set up camp here. You'll see a zoom in. This is the meteorological station that we have. We collect information like wind velocities and direction, temperature, snow depth. I'm going to spin around the image, and I have it annotated here. So this is our bathroom tent. We could bring a clean mountain can in there and be comfortable if it was really cold out and windy. We set up the drill. It's actually drill cores out of right here. Solar power systems, and we actually have a wind tower here to actually power the drill. Never used a generator, never used any fuel for this entire project. Up there is all solar and wind power, working great. We had a cook tent here to kind of a communal area for us to go and relax at the end of the day. And then a private tent, you can imagine being up here for a month, sleeping in the tent quarters with someone else the whole time. You really don't have any private time, so it was nice to have separate tents for everyone.
Yeah, your feet smell anyway.
Exactly. I've been told that. This is what it looks like in the drill tent. So here's Mike Vaskevich actually running the drill, and Brad Markle's a PhD candidate at the University of Washington. And at the bottom of this cable goes down the hole, is basically a drill head. It looks kind of like this. This is actually a hand auger. It's just like augering into the ground for ice fishing. But you have different attachment points, and the cable attaches to this drill, and it basically just rotates and it cuts its way down to the ice, and you pull out meter sections of ice as you go down. So you'll drill a meter down, pull it out, put that meter section in a core box, go down the next meter. That's just a slow, methodical process.
How fast is it?
Really slow, actually, and we like it that way. The reason being, it drills fairly fast. I mean, I can't tell you the revolutions, but it'll take, at the shallower depths, you can get a core in a matter of a couple minutes. But you think about, you have to, at 200 meters depth, you have to drop that cable, that head all the way down 200 meters to get a section. So it may take 15 minutes to do a meter section when it's down at that depth. So the deeper it is, the longer time it takes.
And over the 3-week period or the month period, you're able to do 2 full 250 meter cores.
Well, we did 208 meter cores. We decided to drill at not the deepest location at the site. We decided to drill at the true ice divide. The deepest location was 250 meters depth, but the ice divide has much easier ice dynamics to model and to estimate what the climate change record would be.
So Seth, you guys were there for like a month. Were you drilling every day, all day for a month?
They drilled every day. What my job was actually doing the geophysics, mapping out all the topography, the bed topography, and the ice topography, because I'm doing the numerical modeling to actually model what they come up with from the record. So they're coming up with information about changing precipitation rates, but I need to account for that stretching out of the ice layers. So I'm doing the modeling. So I spend all my time doing geophysics stuff, putting in the met station, that type of work, and then we had 2 people working with Mike full time to actually do the drilling component.
So are you actually taking observations and measurements from the cores as you bring them up, as well as shipping them off?
Yeah, they log the core, looking for things like, you know, thin layers of dust, densities, any artifacts in it like small pebbles or oddities like air bubbles that might be elongated. Usually if ice hasn't moved very far, the air bubble should be circular, but if it's moved, you may see air bubbles that are kind of elongated. Right? So things like that they log, and they have a notebook that they keep track, and every night we come into the tent and we're fighting over the computers to basically enter in all our data at night.
Well, you're fighting over who's going to do the dishes for
And
too.
the days would be generally from 6 in the morning until 9 or 10 at night every day, and we take a day off to kind of rest and get our energy back.
So are the ice cores similar to tree rings that visually you can determine your boundaries?
They are, and I'll show a picture shortly that shows the annual layers from one boundary to the next. This is an example of a radar profile, and this line right here represents where we actually collected the core. So this is the bed topography at the core site, and you can see we did drill it at the deepest location at the ice divide, but it's about 200 meters depth. And I have a stack of pancakes right here. I put a stack of pancakes right there because it's a pretty easy analogy. If you're cooking in the morning, you make a pancake, you put it on a plate. You make another pancake, you put it on the plate. You make another pancake, put it on the plate. What's the oldest pancake? It's the one at the bottom. Ice cores are pretty much the same thing when you find nice flat layers in the ice. Theoretically, your oldest ice is at the bottom, your newest ice is at the top. Interestingly enough, the other site that we looked at, the radar profile showed newer ice at the bottom. It showed ice that had folded over on itself. That's the other reason we didn't drill at that location. Another radiogram. This is actually an image of the ice core at the very bottom of the first core we drilled. It's at, and you can see the dirtiness of it. That's basically sitting right at the bedrock.
And how old would the ice at the bottom be?
We will find out. The core is actually being processed right now. So we'll find out once they get the chemistry record. We have 2 PhD candidates working on it, and that's going to be a multi-year effort.
So what's your best guess though? Which, you know,
So we did some modeling estimates and we came up with a range of 1,000 to 1,500 years old. So these are examples of chemistry records. I'm just gonna, this is a record from Mount Hunter itself. It was a shallow core, only like 10 meters depth before we actually got funding to drill a full surface to bedrock ice core. But all it shows, you see this little cyclical pattern, it's up and down. Each one of these up and downs is a year, and that's an isotope record. You have a change in the chemistry from winter to summer that we see on an annual basis, so we can determine the annual layers. The other thing that we use is we use ions from volcanic events, so we can date our cores absolutely with a known volcanic horizon that's in the ice core. So we have relative dating from these isotope records, and we have absolute dates that we can ground truth that we kind of check our ice core depth.